Hey everyone, Matt here from MRB Accounting. So we all remember when Uber went public a few months ago. They offered, their initial public offering, and it was amazing to most of us that that company, considering its fiscal history, it lost about anywhere around three and change billion in 2018, and it lost over 10 billion in the past 3 years. Um, and apparently it's going to lose about 1 billion, or it did lose about 1 billion in the first quarter of this year. So think about it this way. If you're an Uber driver, you're considered an independent contractor, correct? Contractor, excuse me. Imagine if Uber hired employees instead of classifying its drivers as independent contractors. That's amazing. So also think about why are contractors often preferred. So the distinction is important that, the bottom line of all these companies, whether you're small or large, public or private, the contractor is paid the same as a full-time employee. It's just that when you're a 1099er, so to speak, when you're an independent contractor, you cost the business less. So contractors aren't offered what? Full benefits packages. They're not getting medical, dental, 401k matching, health savings account, you know, other benefits, things like that. They don't get pensions. I mean, most employees put in a portion of the pension, but they're defined contribution plans like 401ks and things like that. The businesses don't have to pay unemployment insurance costs then, federal and state. They really are off the hook for collecting all these payroll taxes that will go to Social Security and Medicare. So the company doesn't have to hand over that portion of the taxes. So the company is really making out from all the things I just mentioned. So we have the Department of Labor. That's who oversees all of this. Um, so, you know, there is gig workers. You could classify them as an example. We'll just say Uber and Lyft. So we really need to make sure that the classification of those types of workers remain the same, for companies to benefit from hiring independent contractors. So, um, the Department of Labor said in one of their bulletins that it does not impose requirements on how its service providers must perform their work, such as transportation route to take, the order in which to clean an apartment, and so forth, or the materials that they must use. So they really also must be using their own equipment, their own tools, things like that. Um, a lack of schedule is what they want to see, the Department of Labor, when you're considering to classify your employees as independent contractors. Really, employee is not the right word to use, but for this video's purposes, I will use the word employee right there. But the IRS has specific rulings on which tax situations apply only to the company that asks for it. So other businesses tend to view such communications as indicators of the federal agency's approach to similar cases in which, it could be worth billions of dollars to a gig economy. That's such a large expense. I mean, there's over 5 million contract workers. I got this figure that was estimated. And if those contract workers were all of a sudden considered employees, where all the other taxes, Medicare, federal, state, Social Security would have to be withheld, that's a huge expense for these companies, large or small. So, from the looks of it, I mean, nothing seems to be changing. The law does seem to be getting tighter. It is going into random companies, assessing them, auditing them. But again, that takes time. That takes a lot of power from the state, a lot of man, woman power from the state authority to come in and audit these companies, literally walk into your business and say, hey, who is person A, B, C, D? Are they an employee? They sure look like it. They're wearing a shirt. I've seen them here for the past 5 days straight. They've come in at 9, they left at 5. It sounds like they're on a specific time schedule, and it looks like they're using your tools. Let's say they're scooping ice cream, they're delivering products, they're on a schedule that, just like how I explained it, that does not seem like they're an employee. That a contractor, I'm sorry. It sounds like they're an employee. So let's break it down. So the behavioral control. So it's the type of instructions that are given. So again, just as I said, how to work, where to work, when to work. So that's very specific. Depending on those instructions, that behavioral control will fall into either the employee or the independent contractor bucket. Next up, the degree of instruction. So again, the more detail, the more control the business has over the worker, that really pushes that worker into the employee bucket. But the less instruction given, the less control, the worker's more likely an independent contractor. Third, we have evaluation systems. So if there's a performance, some sort of performance metric that measures how this employee is working, it could really point to either side, independent contractor or an employee. But that is definitely interesting to look at, the evaluation system, the way that, again, we're measuring the work that's performed. It's very tough with this one, but the IRS Department of Labor does look at to see if there is an evaluation system in place. Because typically, you receive a bonus at the end of the year from your company, let's say, that typically is followed with, this paperwork that says, hey, you performed A, B, C, and D up to par. You received a 5 out of 5 on the scale. Here's your bonus. Similar to that, if an independent contractor was to receive some sort of evaluation again, it's kind of pushing you into the employee bucket. But let's move on to the fourth and final one, training. So if the business is giving the worker any type of training, on the job training, that means that they want the job done in a particular fashion. So this is pretty strong evidence that the worker is definitely an employee, whether it's periodic or ongoing. Procedures and methods, that really indicates that the employee is there to stay. Again, employee keyword here. It's the relationship between the two. So the worker, quote unquote, again, independent contractor or employee, and the employer. That relationship tells you a lot how to classify them. Again, this sounds very redundant, but this is how the Department of Labor and the IRS really look at your business to see if you have independent contractors or you should be collecting payroll tax and whatnot where they're an employee then. So financial control, whether or not you guys like it, there is financial controls involved that the Department of Labor uses to look at how a worker performs his or her job. So these factors are significant investment. Again, how much of an investment are you, the owner of the business, putting into the equipment that someone else is using, the worker is using? There are dollar limits used that must be met to be deemed a significant investment. But once it reaches a certain level, it does show that, this employee is really an employee. They're not an independent contractor. Unreimbursed expenses. So independent contractors are more likely to have unreimbursed business expenses than employees. So any fixed ongoing costs that are incurred, regardless of the work, is currently being performed. It's especially important to realize that here. So employees can also have these unreimbursed business expenses, but in connection with the full-time position, most of the work they're doing, the Tax Jobs and Cuts Act eliminated it. So very few people are actually allowed to have these business expenses, which really it falls into this 2% miscellaneous category, which we'll go into another part of the video, but that was taken away. Very few people actually qualify for that now. So the opportunity for profit or loss. So having the probability of incurring a loss indicates the worker is definitely an independent contractor. Services available to the market. So an independent contractor is typically free to seek out other business opportunities in that same marketplace. Whereas an employee, not saying that they're stuck, but they're glued down to this one employer. They're not, looking around, working at the same time, multiple jobs, the same type of marketplace. Although in today's economy, people very well can have several part-time jobs, and they are considered employees, not independent contractors. And lastly, here for financial control factors, method of payment. So an employee typically gets a regular wage amount for that specific time period, while an independent contractor, they're usually paid a flat fee for that job. So note the word usually. Some professions, contractors do get paid hourly, but typically it's a flat fee for that job. So let's just say, to put it in simplest terms, a landscaping company comes to your house, they mow, contracting them out. You're not hiring them, they're not an employee. We could take this example a little bit deeper. You're a business and you hired out an IT service to help manage your router, your Ethernet connections, your wireless network. They're not employees. You're contracting them out, but you're using their services. So now the type of work relationship. This is very interesting. So this deals with how a worker and a business perceive their relationship to each other. So written contracts, employee benefits, how permanent the relationship is, and the services provided as a key activity of the business. I mean, so let's just go back to the written contract. So pretty much with an employee, you sign a contract most of the time stating that you are an employee and you're going to work for this salary, this wage level, and you're going to show up 9 to 5 or whatever the assumed hours are, and you're going to get paid that wage. Well, sometimes with an independent contractor, you actually might have the same exact thing. So for the IRS, written contracts, that's not sufficient enough. The IRS needs to see other types. Like we said earlier, we said financial, we said behavioral control, and I gave that overview. A written contract really is not enough to determine whether or not this person, this individual, is an employee or an independent contractor. Next, like I said, was employee benefits. So health insurance, pension plans, vacation, sick days, disability, that's usually only provided to employees. If there's an employer who's offering these to a worker, they're an employee. They're not an independent contractor. But being redundant here, a contractor works a deal to get paid while taking a break from the job for a vacation, let's say. I mean, again, it's all based on the circumstances and the facts involved. That's why accounting and tax I found so interesting. There's a bunch of theories floating around up here, kind of like mathematics, and then you're given a problem and you apply those theories out to real life, to those factual situations, and we get the result. So same thing here. I said also permanency of the relationship. So again, this is under the relationship category. So while you can lose your working for the man job at any time, that's pretty much a permanent employmentship. So you show up every day, 9 to 5, you work, you get paid at the end of the week, so forth. But sometimes when a company hires a worker, they provide that expectation where the relationship is only for that specific project or period. Sure, they could tell you, hey, we're going to use you in the future for X, Y, and Z, but that's not right now what you're getting paid for, what you're contracted out for. This is sufficient evidence enough that the employer-employee relationship is that there are a contracted worker. So again, a specific project or a period of time, you're an independent contractor. Next up, we have here services provided as a key activity of the business. So if a worker provides services that are a key aspect of the business, it's more likely that the employer will have the right to direct or control his or her activities. And that makes a person definitely an employee. So we could go on and on about all these other determining factors, and we will in our second video. So check back, subscribe, like. Let's get to it, everyone.